Hello everyone, I'm Deacon Pedro and welcome back to Faith in a Time of Crisis. On August 4th, 2020, a massive chemical explosion ripped through Beirut's port area and downtown, killing 200 people and injuring 5,000. The blast, which was equivalent to a 3.3 magnitude earthquake, was felt as far away as the island of Cyprus and caused extensive damage across the capital city of Lebanon, leaving 300,000 people homeless. As if that wasn't bad enough, this catastrophe happened in the midst of another crisis, one caused by COVID-19, which in itself was happening in the middle of one of the country's worst economic crises. So to tell us a little more about the situation in Lebanon and how things are there right now, I'm joined by Carl Hétu. He's the National Director of Catholic Near East Welfare Association Canada. Carl, thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Pedro.
So you're in touch with your staff down in Beirut. What is the situation in Beirut right now?
Yes, yesterday morning we talked with Michel Constantin and his team of 11 staff, and like they said, they've never seen something like this. It's like going into hell. Very, very terrible. It's everybody's affected. Everybody's family is affected. The city is chaos. Totally chaotic. The country is on its knees. People are really, really under shock. It's to say the least, and now are struggling because after all that time, already several days of this, it's very difficult to organize immediate aid. You cannot just find food anywhere. You cannot find supplies anywhere. You have to trying to understand who still have the capacity to deliver the aid. So our staff have been working over time with many other partners to try to really reach out to people through a very serious assessment and responding as quick as possible, in particular for food distribution. Right. As you know, the explosion, the blast, has destroyed 3 months of grain supplies to the country. And wow. So people now don't necessarily have those 300,000 people that you're talking about don't have access to their fridge. They don't have access to their food. Anyway, it's been damaged. There's been no electricity. Meat is spoiled. All that is gone. So, people are struggling just for food right now. Yeah. And people, are struggling like anywhere else. There's diabetes people with pressure problems, and they need to have access to their insulin, to their medicine, to everything else. And that's problematic as well. Yeah. So it's pretty bad. It's bad. Our staff was really pretty clear about this. Some of them have been through the Civil War of 1975 to 1990, and they've never seen such a blast, such a massive destruction like this. They just can't believe it. Yeah. Is it fair to say that before the explosion, people were already struggling because of COVID? Totally.
But what was the situation before COVID? Well,
the country has been struggling economically speaking. I mean, it's the third indebted country in the world. Okay. And so right there alone, when you owe so much money to the outside world, it's very difficult in the banking, enterprise, business. And so it's been already very complex. Also with 30 years of the same people ruling the country with the sectarian kind of agreement they took after the Civil War of 1990, any government after such a period to be in place, it will become inefficient. And so what we see happening is political crisis, economic crisis. I mean, the Lebanese money is worth nothing. Banking system are all closed right now. Nobody can have access to their money. And so before even the COVID, our organization at CNEWA, we were already planning to have programs to help out the high number of new poor in Lebanon. And here we're not talking about the refugee crisis, where over 1 million Syrian over the last 7 years have showed up at the door of Lebanese. And the Lebanese have been great to welcome them, to care for them, but it's been too much. The country is falling apart. Even before COVID arrived, COVID accentuated that, and now this blast is like...
Yeah, that's right. You mentioned the Syrian refugees, and of course, so you're saying that the country was having an economic crisis even before they were swarmed, and I hate to use that word, with the Syrian influx of refugees, and then that has added more pressure, and then on top of that, we're hit with the coronavirus.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a sequence of events that have been worsening the situation. So you know, the Syrian refugees. I mean, just believe it. When you I've been to Lebanon many times, and each time there've been more refugees, and those refugees, you know, they need to work.
Yeah.
And what do? They take the place of the Lebanese, whether it's somebody in construction, welding, name it. They need to work. And many Lebanese shops who thought, hey, cheap labor, let's use it. And so that's what's been happening. Many Lebanese lost their jobs.
Yeah.
And the Syrian refugees were not really well paid anyway. So you know, it just means that a lot of the different dispensaries we were supported, food distribution, suddenly in the last 2 years, we've seen a great change where before it was mainly refugees, now half of them were Lebanese lining up to get food. People had never seen that since the Civil War of 75, 1990. Yeah. And that was before COVID.
That's before COVID. So, and do you know what the COVID situation was for Lebanon in terms of cases?
Terrible.
Did the government, were there restrictions? Did the government shut down? I mean,
of course, yeah. All the same kind of things that happened to Canada, all those restrictions started to happen over there as well. But how can you do this? You've seen, now we see a lot of pictures of downtown Beirut, for example. People don't live in bungalows like in Canada. They live in condos. They're all close to one another. If you go to the poor neighborhood where the refugees are, I mean, sorry, there's no clean water to wash your hands every 2 minutes, to have access to masks. Forget about that. Nobody can have access to masks in great quantity. Yeah. You know, distancing, everybody's close to one another all the time. Yeah. And so it's been very difficult. And unfortunately, the virus has been picking up. Jobs have been lost, shops being closed, hospital overburdened. So all of that were already in existence when the blast happened. And so taking care now of injured and etc. I mean, just in Beirut, 4 hospitals were demolished, many of them Christian hospitals, serving all. And we were supporting them, by the way, and many of the different support their healthcare. So that's the sad situation is Lebanon did not need this blast at all. It was already so complicated ahead of time.
Yeah, and you mentioned the CNEWA, Catholic Near East Welfare Association, you have headquarters in Beirut.
Yeah, we do.
What sounds like the work for CNEWA in Lebanon is, you know, cut out for you. What kind of work were you doing in Lebanon before, and what's your presence there?
But you know, Pedro, that CNEWA received a pontifical mandate in 1926. And, you know, what happened in the 1920s, the late 1920s, was the end of the Ottoman Empire. It was the Armenian genocide in 1915 and 16. Yeah. And where did all those people go? They went to Lebanon. And so the Armenians and many others went to Lebanon. It's why today there's a large segment of Armenians in Lebanon. And our agency was mandated by the Pope at that time to respond to those humanitarian crises right there. And so, and then we got a renewed mandate by Pius XII in 1949 to support 300,000 Palestinian refugees that ended up going to Lebanon. Today, there are still 500,000 Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, 75 years later, that we need to cope with. So our agency has been helping out throughout that. And during the Civil War of 75 to 90, we were helping emergency all the time throughout this, and then got involved with pretty much everybody afterwards in the reconstruction of villages and between ethnicity, so people can find peace and reconciliation again in Lebanon. And so we've been involved all along with our office there, with the local people. Our office is made of Lebanese people, made from all the different churches that are there, Maronites, Melkite, Greek Orthodox, Syriac, and others that are the fabric of Christianity in Lebanon. So So our office is not new, and we're not there to go and tell people what to do. We are working with the people. They know what to do, and the idea is they need the means. And so working with the church, our approach has always been the same, is to serve all and in Lebanon. And so what we were working just before this happened is our director and our staff were planning the 2021 budget, where there was going to be a major shift from supporting refugees to help poor Lebanese, and we were about to start a major campaign by the year end on Lebanon anyway to deal with those new issues. And then this blast happened, and which complicates everything.
And your office was also affected by the blast, right?
Oh yeah, totally. Even though we're a bit further, but we're near the coast anyway, and the blast wind, the wind of the blast destroy all the windows of our building. Computers went flying and doors, things like that. And thank God our staff had left only a few minutes ahead of time, and so they were not injured. But if they would have been there, they would all have been injured seriously.
Were they, and how did COVID affect your staff personally? Did you have them working from home, or were they able to?
Well, of course, our office had to close down. Even one of our staff got the COVID as well.
Really?
So fortunately, not the other staff were affected by COVID, but that created a shock for us as well. So it limited our work. Many of our programs needed to be put on hold, especially dealing with schools and a lot of schools for Iraqi refugee, Syrian refugees, or other Lebanese. All that was closed down. So yes, the COVID impacted seriously the daily life of the Lebanon.
The papal mandate to CNEWA is obviously not just to Lebanon, it's to the whole Near East. How important is the operation in Beirut as a base for some of the other Middle Eastern countries where you cannot have headquarters?
Yes. But because of all the different crises that hit Lebanon, our staff in Lebanon have become very much expert in terms of responding adequately with their great experience to all the different crises, like the Hezbollah war of 2006 with Israel, for example. We played an important part of welcoming Shiites from a certain part of Lebanon, where Christians welcomed the Shiites, the Muslims, in their homes during that period. So because of that vast experience, they have become really a center point for us for the entire Middle East. So that's why they cover the program that we have in Syria. Also our program, part of our program in the Negev Plain and the Kurdistan, Iraq. And also they cover our program in Egypt. So
interesting.
So that office has become really an important part of CNEWA.
Important. You mentioned the civil war, and civil war sounds pretty drastic, but would you say that the situation that the country's going on now is probably one of the worst crises they've ever gone through when you put everything together?
Well, I'll leave that to the historian to debate, but let's say that it's not the first time that Lebanon is going through a crisis. They've been going through many crises because Lebanon is an area that international power really have their eyes on, whether it's the States, Europe, whether it's the Far East, whether it's Russia. It's the place of trade. That's a place where we walk into the Middle East. And so, but what's unique with Lebanon is it has a composition that you won't find anywhere else in the Middle East. You have about 25% of the population, which is Shiites, and then another 20 to 30 that is Sunni Muslim, and then you have 40% or so Christians, you have Druze and other small groups. So it's very, in terms of ethnicity and religious composition, very unique. And what also is unique is throughout the ages, especially the last century, those different groups have been able to agree on each other and run Lebanon as a country. And it comes in cycle where one group believe they don't have enough, and then you enter some difficulty. And the 1975 war was that. There was some people that were really dissatisfied with the arrangements of before, and that impacted with the Palestinian question of the time enter this really mean civil war. Many people would tell you that was the worst time that Lebanon experienced. Coming out of the war, though, we're coming out to another cycle. And now the agreement of 1990, the sectarian agreement, where everybody had their own share, has come to an end, where now the question that is being asked and posed and being forced by the people demonstrating since October is to say, well, it was great arrangement, the sectarian agreement we had between everybody. It kept peace, actually, but now it's no longer possible. Now it's time to have a country called Lebanon, where Shiites are Shiites Lebanon, Sunni are Sunni Lebanese, Christians are Christian Lebanese. And this notion of nationalism never really existed in Lebanon.
Interesting. So it does sound like Lebanon is pretty unique in the Middle East. The protests, so there's these protests that have been, at least the impression we get here is that they've sparked because of the explosion. But you're saying that the protest began almost a year ago.
Absolutely. Last October, people started going in the streets, because they had enough. And that's where the money started to lose its ground. Okay. That's where the banking system started to fall. But that started much before. I remember going to Lebanon around 2014-15, and it was what we call the garbage collection crisis. Just to show you how inefficient the government had become, from one year to another, when I went to Lebanon, the garbage pile had become 2-story high in Beirut alone, all over Beirut, because the different faction controlling the garbage couldn't agree on what to share. The one would lose too much. So in order not to create battles and fights between each other, then they decided to wait. And then their solution, Pedro, do you know what it was? To put the garbage in the Mediterranean Sea. That's where all the garbage of Beirut is going into right now. Yeah. So things like that. That's only one example of many that has exacerbated, that has create tension with the population.
Right. And as you said, any country, any government that is in power for 30 years is going to have problems. Would you say then that this government is not equipped to deal with this current crisis?
No, it's not. It's not equipped. It's not equipped to deal with garbage. It's not equipped to nothing. Look, who's cleaning up the city right now? It's the people. Yeah. And to their credit. At the same time, Pedro, I'd like to add something is, Lebanon, when Jean Paul II went there, he says, Lebanon is a message to the Middle East, a message to the world about how it can be, how peace can be, how people can collaborate, respecting one another, because before anything else, they're human beings in front of God. And so that message has been a reality to a certain level in Lebanon. It's been a political democracy. We can say whatever we want about it, and yes, the critiques are right. The thing that's good about it, it's kept peace. Yeah. It kept peace, and it kept the church to dialogue. I mean, the Patriarch Ray of the Maronite Church is inviting all church leaders every year, and they dialogue constantly about the affairs of the country, how to keep and maintain peace. And that's so important. Yeah. But the problematic is, you and I know, and everybody listening to us, that the interest of Lebanon, not necessarily the interest of the rest of the big power in the world, that have been letting the Syrian conflict breaking down to the worst spiral of violence, of selling weaponry, getting rich out of it, let's be frank. And so what happened is, then instead of putting millions of dollars into maybe developing a good democracy in Lebanon that could be a great example to other nations, they're accentuating division, battling fields, attacks that are becoming proxy war in Syria, before that in Iraq. Yeah. And let's face it, the 1975-90 war in Lebanon was also a proxy war. So what we see happening is, if we really want to have peace in the Middle East, the governments of the world, like Macron has done in visiting Lebanon just 2 days after everything happened with the blast, is to invest in Lebanon, is to work with the leadership, with the people, to create a real democracy in Lebanon as the people want it, and say thank you for all those different agreements you took in the past, but now the time is there to show an example. But if the nations of this world continue to divide, to invest in armament and war, as Pope as our Pope Francis says, as people come and visit me, those big guys from Russia and United States and Europe come and visit me and they talk about peace. Then as soon as they get out of my office, they sell their weapons and wage war. I mean, sorry, that's double talk and it has to stop.
No, yeah, you're right. I'm glad. Wow. I hope that we have some politicians listening to you talking right now, because that's very good advice to invest in the democracy of a nation like Lebanon. And I'm glad that you mentioned that beautiful quote from John Paul II, that Lebanon is not as much a nation, but it's a message. And we need to invest in that message. What would you say that this particular, well, maybe all three, the whole crisis situation, what has been the impact on the Christian communities? You mentioned it's 40% of the population is Christian.
Yes, absolutely. Before 1975, it was up to 60%. And so because of the war, the civil war of that time, 20% of the Christians left. Okay, some came back to reclaim their villages and land and all of that. But in general, the church has been very strong. All the churches of the Middle East are represented in Lebanon, almost, And so they've always been very strong. The Maronite Church, of course, being the strongest of the church in numbers and in influence.
Right.
Lebanon is the only place in the Middle East where Christians still play a major political and economic role.
I was going to ask you that.
They have political parties. The current president is a Christian Maronite. And so when you look at that, the Christians have been playing a very important role politically, economically, but also on a social level, social services. They have a whole number of religious communities that have their own specialty in healthcare, in school, helping the handicapped, the mental disabled, and so forth. And so us as an organization at CNEWA, we've been working with the church. We've been walking with the church all along the different crises or in time of no crisis. Lebanon has a period of no crisis. And the church has played that role, an important role to reach out to all, not just to Christians, but to all, to show by example that it can work if we respect one another. Yeah. And so access to school, education, access to healthcare, access to job is for all, not just for a group.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's why the Christians have always played an important part in Lebanon, as they have all over the Middle East, by the way. Yeah. And so it's why our mandate as an agency has been to walk with, has been to accompany the church and give them the tools to do so. So yes, the Christian play and still play, I hope, an important part in there. But I'm telling you, if the country goes into a civil war again, and the chances are it might go there, because not everybody is in the streets rallying against the government, and so there are other groups that don't like what they're seeing. If we're moving into this, be sure another 20 to 25% of the Christians will leave again, and that will impact not only on the Christians but on peace that can be happening in Lebanon.
Yeah, wow. This sounds like a lot's going on, and it's so good that organizations like CNEWA are there, not just accompanying, as you said, but you're actually part of that, complex piece of everyone participating and supporting each other. What would you say, Carl, is the most urgent need right now for Lebanon?
Well, right now, I can tell you that our office, coordinating with other Christians organizations worldwide and locally, trying to get packages going to 5,000 families. So food packages with hygiene product, but also food.
Okay.
And so that's been our priority at this moment, because food is running out, and people are really desperately need for that. And so to acquire the food first, to find it, and then to organize it, to package it, to distribute it. So it's a lot of work, but thank God there's so many volunteers on the ground that already existed because of all the work we were doing with refugees and with local poors, that it's just a matter of using the same network that already existed and adding the capacity of responding. So
so it's pretty basic. Is the food has to come from abroad, or can they source out food?
But the idea is to sort out what we can find still in Lebanon. Then you have to go abroad. I mean, about 75% of all goods is imported for going to Lebanon. So they have their infrastructures are very limited to produce even though there's a lot of farmland in the south and west, east of Lebanon. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And of course, CNEWA has launched an emergency relief fund to support. So how does that work, and how can people participate?
Yeah, but you know, we with our office locally in Lebanon that provides all the information, we've put the web donation page on our web, so CNEWA.ca. People can phone us in our toll-free number as well. It can be found on our web, no problem. And it's a new web page, so much easier to handle as well. So, and then we're updating with our blog. We have a blog pages where we are updating what's going on in Lebanon pretty much every day. So when we're talking about food right now, of course, tomorrow it's going to be healthcare, then it's going to be housing, then it's going to be job creation. So it's different stages. Right now it's emerging stages, emergency, but you know, in 6 months, it's going to be trying to create life again with job creation, sustaining businesses, helping hospital to run again. So a lot of job creation will happen. And so even though we're helping a lot right now, I mean, the response, by the way, Pedro, has been amazing. And I would like to say thank you for people that have donated to us and trusted us to do that great work. And also, you know, let's face it, it's the response of the Catholic Church overall here in Canada is great. All the different Catholic organizations that we all know also participate in this. It's same thing in France and all over Europe. So the church once again is responding fast and quickly with a good system. So at CNEWA, yes, people can donate, and I can tell you whether it's today you donate or it's in 6 months. Or in a year from now, because let me tell you, it will be years before things are fixed up in Lebanon. Money will be well used.
Good. It's good to know that has been a good response so far. And I think it's a good reminder for people that they shouldn't stop supporting definitely the work of CNEWA, but specifically the work in Lebanon, because it's not, as you said, it's an ongoing and changing situation. So if people want to support, again, the website is CNEWA.ca. Very easy. Just go there and follow the instructions. Carl, thank you so much. I always feel like whenever we talk, we're actually talking because there's something not great happening. So the circumstances aren't great, but I'm glad that you're and your team are on the ground and continuing to do the work that you've been mandated to do by the Pope. And that's very important and encouraging to know.
Thank you very much, Pedro. And, you know, God leads the way here. In every crisis that takes place, there's something amazing happening in mobilization, alternative way of looking at the world. So even though it's a painful sight right now, let me tell you, in a year from now, we may have a discussion to see that some amazing movements towards peace and other nice things will happen, not only in Lebanon, all over the Middle East, but Ukraine, Ethiopia, and the other places we're in.
And keep reminding people that Lebanon is not just a nation, but a message. I love that. And to pray. Let's not forget praying. We always talk about financial help and food and basics, but prayer is always good.
Prayer changes the heart.
Prayer changes the heart. Amen. Carl Hétu, National Director of Catholic Near East Welfare Association Canada, thank you for joining us today and helping us understand the situation in Lebanon right now. Thank you, Carl.
A pleasure.
And that brings us to the end of our program today. Again, continue visiting our website for all kinds of videos and articles on this crisis and the whole COVID crisis that we've been going through. And remember to stay in prayer and don't lose your faith in the midst of crises. Take care.